G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic Friday. It's the weekend tomorrow. I hope that you've got some plans and that you spend some time with yourself and your family. Now, of course, as always, we have a lot to go over. Of course, we will look at the maps. I want to look at some geolocated footage to get an idea of where these maps may be moving, where presence of soldiers is, even if it's not reflected onto the map. But importantly in this, and I believe most importantly, we need to look at where the fortifications are as Russia advances and what this may tell us about the future of this war. But of course, the main topic which we're going to talk about is, well, it's a world first, the world first use in combat of an ICBM or an IRBM. So don't worry yourself too much with these acronyms. So you're talking about an intercontinental ballistic missile or an intermediate range ballistic missile, or some will say a medium range ballistic missile. So either way, that doesn't really matter one way or the other, but this is sending a huge message, and this is a huge escalation with a lot of rattling, saber rattling towards potentially a nuclear strike. So we're going to look over all of this footage and what may be coming next. That is the important part. So let's look over the footage first. So this is over Dnipro. So as you can see, this is security camera footage here, and you can see looking like the hammer of God coming down from very high in the skies, almost coming vertically. So that trajectory, you can start seeing these salvos then striking in different areas. Let's look at then the next bit of footage. Again, if you want to go back and review any of this footage, go onto my Telegram. The link is in the description. You can see them coming out of the sky here. And I want to show you something because this is MIRV, which is very important element to this. Again, these are, as far as I'm aware, what has actually hit the ground is most likely inert. It's nothing to do with the destruction on the ground. This was to send a message and show this weapon system works. And what it has done is that it really has put it back onto people. You know, NATO, people have been saying for the entirety of the war, none of these ICBMs will work. You know, they're all rusted away, sitting somewhere. And what we do know is that there is a failure to intercept any of these, and that the sanctions put against Russia have definitely not stopped the development of advanced weapon systems like this, with Russia conducting this test of hypersonic re-entry vehicles. So this, I believe, is some of the most impressive footage on this one. There's another one where you can see them coming out. Oh, this is it, coming out of the sky in these salvos. This is the most clear for what I want to talk about now. So you can tell that these had very high before coming back in, just due to the angle of re-entry. Now, the most important element of something like this, and why it is extremely difficult / impossible to actually intercept, is the MIRV, which I'll show you here. So these are multiple independent re-entry vehicles. Now, some are saying that these are MRV. There's multiple re-entry vehicles, but they're not independent of each other. I want to talk on that. So it's looking like each one of these re-entry has 6 separate warheads, and that there was then 6 salvos of this to somewhere, 36-ish then strikes on target, depending on, because I can't break down if every one of them was that, but would presume that each one is of the same amount of re-entry. Now, some are saying are the salvos of 6 independent from each other? Well, we did see them hit in different areas, even if those 6 in its own group isn't independent of themselves. So it might only be able to hit 6 targets, not hit 36 targets, if that makes sense. But that is why it is so hard to intercept these, because a lot of these can just be decoys. So this is what the head of something like this looks like. Now, nuclear capable is a hard word, because technically I guess a backpack is nuclear capable, so is an Iskander, but this is sort of what we're looking at when talking ICBM. This will be behind just the aerodynamic shroud. That shroud comes off in space. It is jettisoned away, but some of these can just be decoys, just to trick air defenses into going for them. But you can just see the amount of warheads these can have. The speed upon re-entry is incredibly difficult to counter. So I want to stick on that MIRV, that MIRV, just for a second to show you a couple of things, because this is important. So you have the launch of the system, whether it be an ICBM, whether it be a IMBM, IRBM, whatever you want to say. And then once it gets to then its peak or in orbit, depending on the exact system, then it breaks apart, and then we have the multiple re-entry vehicles or multiple independents, depending on the type, then can strike on multiple different targets. So this breakaway. Now, there's some really good videos on YouTube. You can have a look describing exactly how these works, but we see the shroud, then release, jettison, shroud come off, and then the multiple re-entry vehicles from here. So in this case, what it's showing is these are independent, but exactly what occurred on then these strikes last night, it's difficult to get an exact idea, as it is an experimental weapon system, and everything around that is going to be sitting top secret. But the important takeaways is that this was to send a message. Air defense definitely did not stop it, and that the sanctions have not had the effect to stop Russia making and experimenting with highly technical weapon systems like this. And if they've got one of them, likely they've got more, and it's not going to be single use. Now, something I've seen a lot of people point at is, well, this system cost in the tens of millions of dollars per launch. I've seen numbers thrown around of $40 million USD. I don't know how people have got that figure, but okay, let's run with that figure. I'm happy to accept the figure is going to be in the tens of millions, absolutely. So people are going, this doesn't make sense. Well, let's hold up for a second. So, A, if this stops strikes back into Russia of ATACMS, Storm Shadow Scalps against critical targets, those critical targets are going to be worth significantly more than that if the US step back on their policy. So if that occurs, it does make cost sense. Or B, if this, which we have seen, is impossible at this point, we presume, to actually intercept, if it can then destroy systems like, say, your Patriots, a Patriot battery is worth around $1 billion, then it will be cost effective, and it may have both A and B, maybe what we see come of this. So the whole idea of it's not cost effective may not be cost effective against, whatever, but if it can stop those strikes, or if it can take out those systems to allow way cheaper strikes, so Iskanders or whatever to hit, then it is. So I wouldn't just go that straight away. But of course, what this was launched out of was then, we believe, an RS-26 with then a changed then warhead on it. You can just see the sheer scale of something like this. It is very, very large. But interestingly, and I was actually wondering this, because of course Russia, US, China, they all monitor each other's ballistic missiles. And the last thing you'd want is to accidentally trigger something thinking that there's a nuclear strike and there's not. And I was actually wondering, I wonder if Russia rang the US and was like, we're about to do this. I'd say they rang China and other nuclear powers as well. And the Pentagon has confirmed that they have. The US was pre-notified briefly before the launch through nuclear risk reduction channels. And Dmitry Peskov from the Kremlin has said they gave then 30 minutes. The US had previously alerted Ukraine's allies Russia might test such an experimental missile. We spoke about this in yesterday's video. We said, and we've been saying for months, we believe Russia may launch something like this without a warhead on it, like a nuclear warhead, to send a message. We've been saying that for months, and it turns out that we were correct. So let's look over a few bits and pieces in this too. This is from the Pentagon.
Thanks, Lita. So trying to remember some of the order of your questions. So I can confirm that Russia did launch an experimental intermediate range ballistic missile. This IRBM was based on Russia's RS-26 Rubezh intercontinental ballistic missile model. In terms of notifications to the United States was pre-notified briefly before the launch through nuclear risk reduction channels.
So exactly what we said, that it is experimental based on the RS-26 and that the US was then notified about this. So before we look at what Putin and Zelensky and Fighter Bomber have said about this, I have said multiple times that this was about sending a message. So Dmitry Medvedev, of course, Deputy Chair of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, says, so that's what you wanted. Well, you've damn well got it. A hypersonic ballistic missile attack. So saying this is in direct response, you asked for it, and then you got that back. And of course, sending a message. And then we have this here who has some wild takes. But just for a comparison, this is about twice the amount of boom than was delivered by the Russian ICBM strike this morning. Just saying. And this has nothing to do with it. It's nothing about the booms. Those re-entry vehicles were inert or had very low boom in them, if you will, because it's all about sending a message of the next one could have this. The purpose of this was nothing to do with bang. It was about showing the delivery system and sending that message and spreading what has occurred as widely as possible so people see it, and it scares people or politicians potentially in the West, and maybe will reduce some of the support, both military and politically, and as well, depending on what exactly it has struck, because Russia said it struck industrial centres in Dnipro. Now, this guy's Fabian Hoffman. He's a doctoral research fellow at Nuclear Oslo. Don't get too caught up on the range of missile system launch, whether it was ICBM or IRBM. The range isn't the important fact. The fact that it carried MIRV payload, that multiple independent re-entry vehicles, is much more significant for signalling purposes than the reason Russia opted for it. The payload is exclusively associated with nuclear-capable missiles. So yes, this is typically for a nuclear-capable system. But again, if those re-entry vehicles, something hitting, just the kinetic energy of something coming down, if you had a penny coming in at that hypersonic speed, it would do massive damage. Even just these inert ones, if it can strike, what we don't know is how accurate it is, but if that could just strike in a Patriot system, it is going to take it out, whether it's got a warhead on it or not. That was the whole idea of the rods of God back in the day. It was basically putting like a tungsten telegraph pole into orbit and having those come back. With the amount of kinetic energy it would have, it could have similar to a nuclear blast. Of course, these are much, much smaller than that. But again, this could become just a kinetic weapon use as well against targets. That's going to greatly depend on the accuracy of it. But like we just spoke about, what Fabian said was that it had MIRV. And then another contact of mine says, I reckon they will test nuclear weapons on their testing ground so people can add 2 to 2 together. So have they shown this MIRV that the system hasn't been intercepted, that it has had strikes on a nuclear testing ground somewhere? Will Russia then blow up a nuclear bomb? And sort of that whole signalling message package, if you will. So let's look at fighter bomber before we talk about the INF treaty and what Putin and Zelensky have said. In general, the gloomy silence of the West, the evacuation of embassies the day before, and the statements of the Krests about the use of RS-26 are beating. So we warned our counterparties and allies that we would hit the Ukrainians with a non-nuclear ICBM. They accordingly told the Ukrainians about it, and they told us. In order not to be bullshitting, we used it. So far, one, but we need a lot of tests. And it wouldn't hurt to test other missiles and weapons too. For example, the Avant-Garde or the Poseidon. Why should such a testing ground go to waste? So the other system, the Poseidon in this is basically I don't know when a torpedo becomes a drone. I don't know what the threshold is on that, but the Poseidon is basically an underwater drone / torpedo, massive nuclear warhead, and basically can create a massive tidal wave to flood and destroy any cities on the coast. And he's saying we could test something like this. Again, could we see something like that used, but without the warhead as signalling? It's not going to be, though, the Poseidon's not really going to, it might just wash up on the beach if it doesn't have a warhead. But could we see more use of this or other systems? I can't answer the question why there is no epic bang visible on the submunitions of our Wonder weapon hit. But I can offer 3 options. This is not a redesign of the warhead for the high explosive non-nuclear equipment, but there is simply no special warhead. In other words, it's a demonstration of the missile's capabilities. I believe that is most likely. It's a demonstration of this can happen, and we can strap on a nuclear warhead on this in a matter of time. The warhead did not work. I believe that's unlikely. I believe the technical precision of this just hitting somewhere is going. The most simple part is actually just going to have the explosion, and you're talking, let's talk, we had 36, re-entry vehicles, and you're not saying one of them went off. Unlikely. So I believe it's more just an inert, it's just a demonstration. Third, he gives, these are penetrating warheads. The goal is to go as deep as possible at their hypersonic speed and explode there. And then we're seeing practically nothing from the outside. It is clear in this case that such use of submunitions against underground facilities are quite logical. So that could be it too. The speed coming back in can penetrate very deep, doesn't even need an explosion if it can collapse underground bunkers or areas, but I still believe it's just to send a message. Again, we spoke that it wasn't an ICBM, that it's more like an IRBM, but again, this doesn't really matter. We're speaking here about it makes it difficult, if not impossible, to intercept them as this breaks away. And said that a nuclear saber rattling from both Ukraine and Europe itself, it's a pretty sharp signal sent into the West, into Ukraine from Russia. US National Security Council said Russia launched an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile. The statement said Russia likely had only a handful of these missiles and was likely trying to use it to intimidate Ukraine and its supporters. What I will say is that Russia has in the hundreds of older, dated, or potentially expiring ICBMs, and could they fit non-nuclear MIRVs, which we know they've got both systems. I'm not sure how it would be operable together to use those older delivery systems with the newer warheads on those. Russia has no shortage of just the launches for this, regardless of the nuclear factor. Roman Kostenko, the chairman of the Defense and Intelligence Committee in Ukraine's parliament, said Thursday's attack would not prompt Ukraine to alter how it is fighting the war. Of course, what people are looking at is Storm Shadow and ATACMS strikes back into Russia. But it will be interesting to see what the US does, because again, the US, the UK, France, they are in the control of these systems. Ukraine is struggling to hold off fierce Russian advances that have captured territory at an accelerated pace in Ukraine's east. That is part of all of this as one whole. We need to look at individual pieces, as tactical level, strategic, the whole. Like if this is hitting industrial centres, strategic strike, because it affects then down the front line, and that will become more relevant when we look at the map. So let's look at what Putin has said in his complete statement. Citizens of our country and friends across the globe and those who persist in the illusion that strategic defeat can be inflicted upon Russia about the events taking place in the zone of the special military operation, specifically following attacks by Western long-range weapons against our territory. So we can see exactly why this was launched. The escalation of the conflict in Ukraine, instigated by the West, continues with the US and NATO allies previously announcing they authorised the use of long-range high-precision weapons for strikes inside the Russian Federation. The use of these weapons is not possible without the direct involvement of military experts and manufacturing nations. And we know this, that these systems, even just the most basic like GPS, well, Ukraine doesn't have GPS satellites in the sky, the terrain tracking some of these items. So there is a lot of support there. And like I spoke about yesterday, so where is the threshold between a strike on Russia from NATO and a strike on Russia from Ukraine? If it is all it is if a Ukrainian pushes the button for the Storm Shadow, or he's flying the plane, releases them, I don't know where that is. I fully believe Ukraine has the right to strike back inside of Russia with systems. It's a war. Russia doesn't get to then complain about how the nation of which they've moved into defends themselves. But at the same time, Ukraine need to say, shit, maybe they're going to launch more of these if that. So it's this really hard balance. Like I said, I don't know how then, if you're sort of dealing with the balance, how do you ever win? How do you have a strategic defeat? Putin goes on and says on November 19th, 6 tactical ballistic missiles produced by the US during a combined missile assault involving British Storm Shadow missiles and HIMARS systems produced by the US attacked UK and US attacked military facilities inside Russian Federation in Bryansk and Kursk. Our air defense system successfully counteracted these incursions. From the footage I've seen, I don't think they have, but whether it's Russia or Ukraine, it's always, like we see here, debris, or that air defense was 100% successful. And it's hard to actually get evidence to show that that wasn't, other than where we can see them actually hitting. But we do know that likely some of these had hits. Kursk, Putin talks about that a command post was attacked and there was resulting fatalities and injuries on the perimeter security units and serving staff, but he says the command operational staff of the control center suffered no casualties. Again, any numbers like this coming from a leader, grain of salt. On the other side of this, many are saying in this strike that there were North Korean officers killed. Again, there's no evidence to support those claims or these claims. Either I wish to underscore once again the use of the enemy of such weapons cannot affect the course of combat operations in the Special Military Operations Zone. Our forces are making successful advances along the entire line of contact, and all objectives we have set will be accomplished. So will this have a huge change? And we knew this anyway, that this wasn't going to just completely uproot and change the war with Storm Shadow or Scalp. In response to the deployment of American and British long-range weapons, on November 21, Russian forces delivered a combined strike on a facility within Ukraine's defence industrial complex, like we've just been talking about. Tests of one of Russia's latest medium-range missile systems, in this case carrying a non-nuclear hypersonic ballistic missile that our engineers named Orishnik. This is on Dnipro and famous industrial complexes. We're developing intermediate range and shorter range missiles in response to the US plans to produce and deploy intermediate range and shorter range missiles in Europe. He talks about when the US then pulled out of the INF Treaty in 2019, and both Russia and the US pointed fingers at each other. So this is in short. In 2019, the US formally withdrew from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces, the INF. So you couldn't have then ground-launched ballistic cruise missiles between 500 and 5,000 kilometres. The US withdrawal is primarily driven by accusations that Russia had been violating the treaty. So they alleged that Russia, with the NATO designation of the SSC-8 or the 9M729 missile, was violating these and undermining the agreement of the 500 to 5,000. Secondly, that Russia denied and counter-accused. So deny, counter-accuse is what we always talk about if you got in trouble. But Russia's denied these accusations. In turn, it then accused the US of violating the treaty by deploying missile defence systems in Europe, such as the Aegis offshore system, which it argued can be used offensively. Now, some of these air defence systems can be used offensively. S-300, for example, can be used offensively. And strategic context, the US also cited concerns about China's growing missile capability. Since China was not a signatory to the INF Treaty, it was free to develop intermediate range missiles, potentially placing the US and its allies in Asia at a disadvantage, and Russia as well. China's not a signatory. In 2019, the US announced its suspension of the treaty obligations and intention to withdraw. This move raised fears in the new arms race. It allowed both US and Russia to deploy intermediate range missiles freely. So that's sort of some of the background on this. Let's continue here. It has worked out ways to deploy its advanced missile systems to different regions over the world, saying the US has worked out ways to put systems all around the world, and we're not happy about this. As a reminder, Russia has voluntarily and unilaterally committed not to deploy intermediate range, shorter range missiles until US weapons of this kind appear in any region of the world. So they are saying we won't put them somewhere unless you put them somewhere. So again, we know where Russia's allies, who they are, and we know some of the tech that they would like. To reiterate, we're conducting combat tests of this missile system in response to NATO's aggressive actions towards Russia. Our decision on further deployment of intermediate range and short-range missiles will depend on the actions of the US and its satellites. So basically what he's saying here is if you continue these attack and Storm Shadows, we will continue on this, trying to, I guess, have some influence on the future of those systems. We will determine the targets during further tests of our advanced missile systems based on the threats of security of the Russian Federation. We consider ourselves entitled to use weapon systems against military facilities of those countries that allow to use their weapons against our facilities. So strikes outside as well. And in case of escalation of aggressive actions, we will respond decisively and in mirror-like manner. I recommend that the ruling elites of the countries that are hatching plans to use their military contingents against Russia seriously consider this. It goes without saying that when choosing, if necessary, and as a retaliatory measure, targets to be hit by systems such as the Orishnik on Ukrainian territory, we will in advance suggest that civilians and citizens of friendly countries residing in those areas leave danger zones. One thing this may have as a byproduct of this that could benefit Russia is a mass exodus of Ukrainian civilians out into Europe as well. Of course, that has an effect on demographics, it has an effect on Europe, and of course it has an effect on who you can recruit. And Putin says here, well, why without fear of then launching more of these in? Because there is no means of countering such weapons today. Missiles attack targets at a speed of Mach 10, which is 2.5 to 3 kilometers per second. Air defense systems currently available in the world and missile defense systems being created by the Americans in Europe cannot intercept such missiles. It is impossible. Now, some systems may be able to intercept them, but the amount of the submunitions coming down, it's impossible to get all of them. I'd like to emphasize once again that this was not Russia, but the United States that destroyed the international security system by continuing to fight, cling to its hegemony, and pushing the whole world into a global conflict. So this finger pointing that is going on. But we're ready for a turn of events. If anyone still doubts this, make no mistake, it will always be a response. So saber rattling, threats, and we saw last night that you sort of need to back it up. So we've seen those strikes in. Will we see the end of Storm Shadow ATACMS? I don't think so, but it will. There's going to need to be this toss-up. If those continue and this can take out Patriots, or if it is accurate, is the juice worth the squeeze? This is from Zelensky. Our insane neighbour has once again shown what they truly are and how they despise dignity, freedom, and human life itself, and how terrified they are. Now, we keep seeing this through all these channels about, Putin's terrified, Putin's scared. I don't get that straight away from this. I get he's trying to send a message. I don't get the idea that he's terrified everything's about to fall apart, because you don't want that either, because the next one may have a much larger warhead strapped onto it. But I don't think this is from a position of desperate. Desperate's a strong word. It could be from a position of concern. If we need to stop these ATACMS or Storm Shadows, it's going to make the war more expensive. Is that going to swing the tide of the war? Officials from everywhere have noted multiple times that Storm Shadows ATACMS are not going to do that. But Ukraine, really what they want is Tomahawks. So terrified, this is what Zelensky says, so terrified they're already using new missiles and technology advances. And they are searching the world for more weapons, first in Iran, then North Korea. But in the flip side, those countries also want a system like this. That's the escalation concern the US is very worried about. Today it was a new Russian missile. All the parameters, speed, altitude, match those of an intercontinental ballistic missile. All expert evaluations are underway. Obviously, Putin is using Ukraine as a testing ground. Obviously, Putin is terrified when normal life simply exists next to him. So again, what will be the future of these strikes? Is this one and done? Will we see it used again? How many does Russia have? How expensive is it for Russia? And is Ukraine going to continue strikes with NATO back into Russia as well with those Storm Shadow scalp ATACMS? We don't know, but again, wait and see. So of course, here is the map. In the center, we have Ukraine and the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, no changes up in Kursk. We come down in Donetsk, Kursk front, and of course, you can see a lot of red already showing up on this map in multiple directions where Russia has made ground. So let's talk about a couple of things straight off the bat. Let's talk about down in here, and I can show you why we know that this has then pushed forward and that there is further advancement. So just where I've put this red dot, so it's right where my cursor is, we have seen a Russian flag confirming presence of Russian forces in this area and the capture of that territory as well. Now, we'll talk later on about this area and just west of here and where the fortifications are and the big problems that this is creating. So let's stay in this area for now, but we'll just move up to the north. As you can see by the red on this map, that Russia has made ground around Kursk. Now, will the Kursk last to the end of the year? I'm not sure. It seems that the pace here has been fairly quick. So we can see two map updates on this map today. The best way is look where this train line is running. So it's just where the curve is, so just about here, it's saying that there was a Russian advancement through Beretsky, and then just northeast of here, we have Ilenikia. This road's running straight up through here, that it's through the paddock in line with this first then turn. So right in here, that Surak is saying has also been captured by the Russians, again, on that northern flank of Kursk. Fire support then across that reservoir into Kursk to support those troops heading east to west through Kursk itself. Now let's move just further north of here, and we have Seledo-Veshneve area. Of course, this is the flank of Pokrovsk and Minograd. Now let's have a look at this. Again, same general areas. We can see pushes by the Russian forces. Now, some difference in this, but regardless, it's fairly similar. The only major difference is, see where this road comes? This is this road in here, that these like 4 paddocks in here, they have said to become under Russian control recently as well. But let's move down just a little bit more, and you can see around Trodove, as well as Velika Novosilivka, Zolota Neva. Of course, this was at one point the Vuhledar front right back in here. We can see that Russia is making more ground in here. We spoke about Rozdolny and the ability to really flank around Velika Novosilivka, but where there is a concern of the fortifications sitting in here. So let's talk about this right now. Firstly, we'll compare the maps to show where things are moving. Now, this is significantly different. You can see straight off the bat how much further, how much ground Surak is saying that the Russian forces made today. Of course, this is Rozdolny up here, this red dot, but saying the Russian forces are right on the outskirts of Velika Novosilivka as well, like right down in here, somewhere a hell of a long way. Russian army continue advances west of Novodonetsky, Zolota Neva, reaching the locality of Rozdolny, which the grey zone on this map does show. And they've captured several positions and fortifications. Russian forces are now less than 2 kilometres from the eastern outskirts of Velika Novosilivka. So let's have a look at how far 2 kilometres is. So let's go outskirts. Let's go there. So, oh, that doesn't work. That's great. Okay, that's going to be, so up into here somewhere, which is a hell of a long way. But what we really need to look at here, and where we may see then very large, fast changes on the map and not spoken about enough, is the fortifications sitting in here. Now, what I have done in this is I have added this red line in here. This lines up with what the deep state map is showing, not what Surak map says. Remember, Surak shows that this right down where my cursor is has come under control. For the purpose of this exercise, I've just put in what deep state shows of grey zone to the north of Rozdolny, reaching up near this road, okay? Go with this. This is Velika Novosilivka, and you can see some of the fortifications that are getting bypassed. But also, just north of Yasna Polinya, it does look like, even according to this map right here, that Russians are right up to the beginning of this major fortification. Again, credit to John Helland for the fortification map. And we look just east of here, Dalny, I've drawn in the positions as well, that other positions have come under control with then the major defensive works. What we have spoken about is if this area closes up, Velika Novosilivka, behind these major defensive works, which seem to be coming under control fairly quickly, given the effectiveness of defensive works and given the attritional protracted nature of this war and the 2 years prior to this, these are very fast gains considering when relative to the rest of the war. This is a huge concern. If there is an ability to get in behind these areas all the way through to Dnipro and Zap, the amount of fortifications is questionable. This is something I want to show you. Again, this is actually a Bushmaster. This is what I commanded when I was overseas, but I've never seen one of these actually with a drone cage on it that the Ukrainians have obviously welded onto the side of this. It was hit by a drone because that rear door was open and it burned up. But great vehicle, but it's random to see them now with even drone cages on them. So let's look at a few other pieces. Now, in Toretsk in here, there is shown to be an increase of grey zone down through the west of Zalizny. And we do know that there is some geolocated footage of Russian soldiers operating out in here, as well as more through Toretsk. The bit that hasn't even become grey was we had a Russian soldier, multiple soldiers right where that dot is there. So it's definitely still contested ground. So let's continue moving up the map and let's get then to Terny. So no changes shown on this map today, but I want to show you some footage from a Ukrainian drone. So Terny, just in here, so right where my cursor is, it's right on the corner of this paddock right here, where my cursor is. So well into the green zone shown on this. Let's go from corner to green, say 800 meters, which on a map zoomed out seems like not very far, but it is a long way. Just walk in a straight line that far. We do get then this footage, which I can't show you all of, but it is Ukrainian drones striking then Russian forces here. So there's at least a presence well down into Terny here, and Ukrainian sources Noel reports he has then updated his map today to then show this. So into the similar area here that more of Terny has come under Russian control. If we actually line up the deep state map with his map, you can see that it is then showing further down again and closing up this whole sector as well. So a lot of map changes, bit of footage, but the main element is that ballistic missile coming in and what the future will hold, and if people will be intimidated by that. And I'm not just meaning officials or within Ukraine, it also means then civilian populations outside of Ukraine in democratically elected countries which are supporting this war effort, that maybe German citizens may go, we don't want that sort of smoke, we'll vote this way or vote that way. Of course, Trump, with his offsider of Musk, Vance, they have spoken about the threat of nuclear weapons, and especially Elon talks about this a lot, that this really could be aimed more towards that administration rather than the current administration, and the ability to, we need to end the war. Legends, have a fantastic day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.